Welcome to the Reality Taboo, where no topic is off limits. It's March 27th, 2026. I'm going to play a brief excerpt from The Immigrant's Creed. Jeff sent me this description of it. The Immigrant's Creed is a rewrite of the Apostles' Creed framed around immigration themes. Written by Cuban-born PCUSA pastor Jose Luis Casal, it portrays God as the protector of exiles, Jesus as a refugee who fled danger as a child, and ends with a vision of heaven where no one is an immigrant. It's not an official ELCA document, but ELCA clergy have been reciting and sharing it, consistent with the denomination's 2019 declaration of itself as a, quote, sanctuary church body, unquote. Reciting it from beginning to end, like the Apostles' Creed, will take a couple of minutes, but I want to focus on one very brief excerpt concerning Pontius Pilate and how this very pithily illustrates the churchian tendency towards inversion of everything.
Had to suffer the oppression of the tyrant Pontius Pilate, the servant of a foreign power. Jesus was persecuted, beaten, tortured, and finally unjustly accused and condemned to death.
That audio is a little difficult to decipher. What they are saying is they're talking about Jesus saying he had to, quote, suffer the oppression of the tyrant Pontius Pilate, the servant of a foreign power, who then was persecuted, beaten, and finally tortured, accused and condemned to death unjustly, unquote. Well, let's read about Pontius Pilate in chapter 27 of the Gospel of Matthew. When it was morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, deeply regretted what he had done. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in betraying innocent blood. They said, What is that to us? Look to it yourself. Flinging the money into the temple, he departed and went off and hanged himself. The chief priests gathered up the money, but said, It is not lawful to deposit this in the temple treasury, for it is the price of blood. After consultation, they used it to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. Parenthetically, allow a brief Nessian interjection here. Isn't it rich that in this Immigrant's Creed, when we're revisiting the story of Pontius Pilate, we are reminded that the blood money, the infamous 30 pieces of silver that were handed over to Judas to betray Jesus, was ultimately used to purchase a plot of land to throw foreigners, dead foreigners, into. Anyway, ending the parenthetical and returning to the gospel. Quote, That is why that field even today is called the field of blood. Then was fulfilled what had been said through Jeremiah the prophet. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of a man with a price on his head, a price set by some of the Israelites, and they paid it out for the potter's field, just as the Lord had commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and he questioned him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, You say so. And when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he made no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Do you not hear how many things they are testifying against you? But he did not answer him one word, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now on the occasion of the feast, the governor was accustomed to release to the crowd one prisoner whom they wished, and at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had assembled, Pilate said to them, Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus called Messiah? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had handed him over. While he was still seated on the bench, his wife sent him a message, Have nothing to do with that righteous man. I suffered much in a dream today because of him. The chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas, but to destroy Jesus. The governor said to them in reply, Which of the two do you want me to release to you? They answered, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, Then what shall I do with Jesus called Messiah? They all said, Let him be crucified. But he said, Why? What evil has he done? They only shouted the louder, Let him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he was not succeeding at all, but that a riot was breaking out instead, he took water and washed his hands in the sight of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. Look to it yourselves. And the whole people said in reply, His blood be upon us and upon our children. Then he released Barabbas to them, but after he had Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Does that, returning to this blasphemous creed that replaced the Apostles' Creed, returning to this sacrilegious so-called Immigrant's Creed, does that Pilate recounted in the Gospel of Matthew sound like the, quote, oppression of the tyrant, the servant of a foreign power, unquote? Or does Pontius Pilate sound more like a reasonable, decent man who simply in the end lacked the courage of his own convictions? That was his shortcoming. Had Pilate actually been a tyrant, a brutal tyrant who ruled with an iron fist, Jesus would not have died. He would have overruled the braying for blood that the Pharisees and their local votaries were relentlessly calling for. It was, in fact, that Pontius Pilate was tolerant, so tolerant of blatant evil that ultimately led to Christ's crucifixion. And so, with full scriptural grounding, it is not hyperbolic to say that literally Pontius Pilate's tolerance is what crucified Jesus Christ.